In a cold, rain-soaked flea market, a retired Navy SEAL almost kept walking, until he saw a mother dog who didn't cry, didn't beg, just watched him. Beside her, 3 tiny puppies were shaking in the cold, while a young girl stood there, trying to protect them with nothing but her silence. He thought it was cruelty, until he realized they weren't selling the dogs because they didn't care, but because they had nothing left. Then men arrived, the kind who don't save animals, only take them. And suddenly, leaving meant losing more than just a chance to help. That night, danger came quietly, and the dog didn't bark. She only waited, as if she knew someone had to choose what kind of man he would be. A man who once walked away, now stood at the edge of the same choice. But this time, something inside him refused to let him go. So, before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. The rain came down in thin, needling lines that never quite turned into a storm, but never stopped either. It soaked everything slowly, patiently, until the ground itself seemed to give up and soften under the weight of it. The flea market stretched along the edge of the small northern town like something forgotten. Rows of makeshift stalls, stitched together from warped tables, rusted frames, and sagging tarps that shuddered each time the wind pressed through. Mud clung to boots, thick and reluctant. Water pooled in shallow craters, reflecting a gray sky that had no intention of clearing. Eamon Hale walked through it without hurry. At 56, he moved like a man who had learned long ago that speed did not always mean control. He stood just over 6 feet tall, his build lean and disciplined. Not the kind of strength that demanded attention, but the kind that endured. His face was clean-shaven, the hard lines of a square jaw and pronounced cheekbones exposed without softness. His hair, dark brown threaded faintly with gray, was cut short in a military style that had grown just slightly beyond regulation, enough to suggest time had passed, but not enough to erase habit. His skin bore the pale tone of a man who had lived too long under cold skies, weathered by wind more than sun. His gray-blue eyes carried a stillness that people often mistook for calm. It was not calm, it was distance. He wore the same clothing he trusted more than comfort, a worn, tactical combat shirt in faded olive, the fabric softened and frayed at the cuffs and shoulders, a history of use etched into every crease. His combat pants, once sharp in color, had dulled into a tired blend of earth brown and moss green, the knees worn thin, the cargo pockets sagging slightly. Old military work boots grounded him in each step, and a scratched utilitarian watch rested against his wrist like a habit he had never questioned. He had come for something simple. Nails, maybe a length of rope, something practical. He had told himself that before stepping out of his truck. He stopped without knowing exactly when. It was not a sound that caught him. Not at first. It was the absence of one. In a place like this, there was always noise. Vendors calling out, cheap radios crackling, the clatter of metal and plastic. Even the rain had a rhythm against tarp and tin. But here, in a small pocket between 2 leaning stalls, there was a stillness that did not belong. The cage sat low to the ground, its metal bars darkened by rust and damp. It was not large enough for comfort, only for containment. Water had gathered beneath it, turning the dirt into a shallow, cold mire. Inside, the German shepherd did not move. She was a female, around 6 years old by the look of her, black and tan, though the colors were dulled by rain and neglect. Her frame was leaner than it should have been, ribs not sharply visible, but hinted beneath a coat that had lost its healthy thickness. Her ears were upright, but not rigid, one of them dipping ever so slightly as if fatigue had claimed even that small posture. There was a faint scar near her shoulder, old and healed poorly, the fur there thinner. Her eyes were what held him, amber brown, darkened by the low light, steady and aware. She did not bark. She did not whine. She simply watched. Pressed against her body were 3 small puppies, no more than 5 or 6 weeks old. Their coats were still soft, their markings not fully defined. They trembled constantly, their tiny bodies fighting a cold they did not yet understand. One of them shifted weakly, trying to burrow deeper into its mother's side. The dog adjusted slightly, angling her body to shield them from the rain that slipped through the gaps above. That was all. No panic, no pleading, just presence. Beside the cage stood an old man. Walter Dunn looked like someone the weather had been working on for decades. He was thin, his posture slightly bent, as though something inside him had long ago given up holding him straight. His hair was sparse and white, flattened by the damp, and his face was a map of fine lines and deeper creases, skin drawn tight over bone. He wore a heavy coat that might once have been brown, but had faded into a dull, uneven gray, darkened further by rain. Beneath it, a thick sweater peeked through, the fabric worn but clean. His hands trembled slightly as he held onto the handle of a broken umbrella that did little to keep him dry. He did not call out to passing customers. He did not advertise. He simply stood there. The girl at his side was the opposite kind of quiet. Lila Dunn was 13, though there was something about the way she held herself that made her seem older and younger at the same time. She was thin in the way of someone who had not eaten enough for too long, her shoulders narrow beneath a light jacket that was entirely unsuited for the cold. The fabric clung to her, soaked through, turning a pale gray that matched the sky. Her hair, dark brown, hung in damp strands around her face, pulled loosely back as if she had tried to keep it out of the way and given up halfway. Her eyes were large, ringed faintly with shadows, and they did not wander. They stayed on the cage. More precisely, they stayed on the space between the cage and the rest of the world. Eamon looked. Then he turned away. He had learned that lesson well. Not every situation needed him. Not every problem could be solved by stepping in. Sometimes stepping in made things worse. Sometimes it created consequences that stretched far beyond the moment. He had seen that before. He had lived with it. His boots sank slightly into the mud as he moved on, the sounds of the market closing in again around him, dull and distant. He did not quicken his pace, but there was a subtle tightening in his chest that he chose not to name. He had made it past 2 more stalls when it happened. A small movement, a shift that did not belong to the rhythm of the place. One of the puppies slipped. It had been trying to stand, its legs unsteady, pushing itself away from its mother's side for reasons only instinct could explain. Its paws slid against the slick metal floor of the cage. It tipped, fell forward, and did not immediately get back up. It lay there, breathing shallow, its small body trembling in uneven pulses. The mother lowered her head toward it, nudging gently, once, twice. No sound. The girl moved then. Not fast, not frantic. She stepped closer to the cage and crouched, her knees pressing into the wet ground without hesitation. Her hand reached through the bars, fingers brushing the side of the fallen puppy, guiding it back toward the others. Then she did something that made Eamon stop. She lifted her other hand and placed it over the mother dog's eyes, not roughly, not forcefully, just enough to block her view, as if there was something the dog should not have to see. Eamon did not realize he had turned until he was already facing them again. The rain had not changed. The market had not changed. But something in the space between those three figures had shifted. He took a step back, then another. And then he was walking toward them again, slow, deliberate, each step chosen rather than automatic. The old man noticed him first. Walter's gaze lifted, wary but not defensive. There was no sales pitch in his eyes, no practiced line, just a quiet acknowledgement that someone had come close enough to see. "You looking for something?" Walter asked, his voice rough, shaped more by disuse than age. Eamon glanced at the cage, then back at him. "How much?" he asked. Walter did not answer immediately. His grip tightened slightly on the umbrella handle. His eyes flicked once toward the girl, then back to Eamon. Lila spoke instead. "They're not used to being looked at like that," she said. Her voice was soft but not fragile. There was a steadiness in it that did not match her size. Eamon studied her for a moment. The way she positioned herself. Not behind the old man. Not fully beside the cage. Between. He shifted his weight slightly. The old instinct to assess, to read a situation before acting, surfacing without effort. The cage was clean. Cleaner than the surroundings suggested it should be. The dog's coat, though wet and thin, showed no signs of recent abuse. No fresh wounds, no hesitation when the girl's hand touched her. The posture of the dog itself was wrong for abandonment. Alert, controlled, trained. Eamon looked back at Walter. "I asked how much," he said, not unkindly, but without softness. Walter exhaled slowly, the breath catching slightly in his chest, as if it cost more than it should. "It's not," he began, then stopped. His eyes dropped to the ground, to the mud, to the water gathering around his boots. "It's not about the price," he said finally. "Not really." Eamon waited. The old man reached into his coat, pulling out a folded piece of paper. It was damp, the edges soft from the rain. He held it out, not quite meeting Eamon's eyes. Eamon took it. The ink had bled in places, but the meaning was clear enough. Notice of eviction. Final. Immediate. Eamon read it once, then again. He handed it back. Walter took it with both hands this time, as if it weighed more than paper should. "If they're not sold today," Walter said quietly, "there won't be a place to keep them tomorrow." The rain tapped softly against the cage. One of the puppies made a small sound, barely more than a breath. Eamon looked at the girl again. She had not moved, still there, still between. But now he saw something else. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even desperation. It was the effort of holding something together that had already begun to come apart. Eamon shifted his gaze to the dog. Rhea watched him. Not the way a frightened animal watched a stranger. Not the way a hopeful animal watched a possible savior. She watched him like she was waiting, not for help, for a decision. Eamon felt something tighten in his chest again, sharper this time. He turned. The motion was deliberate, controlled. He stepped away from the cage, from the old man, from the girl, from the dog. His boots carried him back into the noise, into the market, into the safety of distance. He walked 10 steps, 15, 20. The rain filled in the space behind him, and then a sound. Faint, irregular, metal against metal, not loud enough to draw attention, not sharp enough to demand it, just a small, persistent clink. Eamon stopped. It came again. He did not turn immediately. He stood there, the sound settling into something deeper than hearing, something that reached past habit and into memory. Then, slowly, he looked back. The cage had shifted slightly where it rested in the mud. The dog had not moved. The girl still knelt. The old man still stood. Nothing had changed. And yet, Eamon felt it. That quiet, unwelcome certainty. He had seen something, and if he walked away now, it would not stay here. It would follow him. Eamon did not remember deciding to turn back. One moment he was standing in the muddy lane, the weight of the rain settling into his shoulders, the low murmur of the market pressing in around him. The next, he was walking toward the cage again, each step quieter than the last, as if something inside him preferred not to be noticed. The old man saw him coming. Walter Dunn straightened slightly, though it cost him. Up close, the tremor in his hands was more obvious, not just from the cold. There was a faint bluish tint at the edges of his lips, and his breathing came a fraction too shallow for comfort. His coat, once heavy enough to keep out weather, now hung loosely on his frame, soaked through and pulling him down. "You came back," Walter said, not surprised, just stating it the way a man states something that has already happened. Eamon stopped beside the cage again. The dog lifted her head a fraction. Rhea. He did not know her name yet, but the way she carried herself made it feel like she had one. Her eyes found his again, steady, unblinking. There was a patience in them that unsettled him more than fear would have. The puppies were quieter now. One had its head tucked beneath its mother's body, another pressed close to her side, and the third, the one that had fallen earlier, was breathing shallow but steady, its small chest rising and falling with effort. Eamon crouched slightly, not close enough to touch, just enough to see. "She's been trained," he said. Walter gave a slow nod. "Not by me." There was no pride in the statement, no attempt to claim something that wasn't his. Eamon glanced at the cage again. The bars were rusted, but not neglected. The floor had been cleaned recently, even in these conditions. Someone had taken care, even when there was little left to give. He shifted his attention to the girl. Lila stood exactly where she had before, but now that he was closer, he could see the tension in her posture. It wasn't just that she stood between the cage and the world. It was how she did it. Her shoulders were slightly forward, her weight balanced as if she expected something to come at her, something she would have to stop. Her eyes flicked to him once, then back to the dog. "Where did you get her?" Eamon asked. Walter hesitated. "Friend of mine," he said. "Used to run dogs. Proper work, not—" He gestured vaguely toward the rest of the market. "Not this." What happened to him? Walter's jaw tightened slightly. "Winter happened," he said. "Took him in his sleep. Heart, they said. I took the dog after." Eamon looked back at Rhea. She had not moved, but there was a slight shift in her posture now. Not defensive, not aggressive, aware. "And the puppies?" Walter gave a small, almost apologetic shrug. "She had them 2 months ago," he said. "Didn't think she would. Didn't think—" He stopped, as if finishing the sentence would require more than he had. Eamon let the silence sit. Rain tapped against the metal bars of the cage, a thin, steady rhythm. "How much?" Eamon asked again. Walter looked at him this time, really looked. There was something like resistance in his expression, not directed at Eamon, but at the question itself. "It's not about what they're worth," he said. "It never is," Eamon replied. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Walter reached into his coat again and pulled out the same folded paper. He didn't hand it over this time. He just held it, his thumb pressing against the damp crease. "They gave me until tomorrow morning," he said. "Sheriff's office posted it. Legal and all that." Eamon nodded once. "Trailer park?" he asked. Walter's eyes flickered, surprised. "You know it?" Eamon didn't answer directly. He knew the type. Old units lined up along a stretch of cracked road, rented land, just enough structure to call it home, just enough legality to take it away when the numbers stopped adding up. "What do you owe?" Eamon asked. Walter shook his head slowly. "Doesn't matter," he said. "More than I have. Less than it should be." Eamon exhaled through his nose. That kind of answer usually meant the number was not the problem. Time was. A gust of wind pushed through the market, rattling the tarps overhead. Water spilled from the edge of a nearby stall, splashing into the mud beside them. One of the puppies whimpered softly. Lila's hand moved instantly, resting against the cage, fingers curling lightly around the cold metal. She didn't look at the puppy. She didn't speak to it. She just stayed there. Eamon watched that. He had seen people comfort before. Words, gestures, reassurances. This wasn't that. This was presence, the kind that didn't try to fix anything because it already knew it couldn't. "Why not sell something else?" Eamon asked, his voice quieter now. Walter gave a small, humorless smile. "You see anything else here worth buying?" he said. Eamon didn't answer. Walter followed his gaze to the scattered items around the stall. A few tools, rusted but usable. A cracked lantern. A box of mismatched hardware. Nothing that would cover a debt. Nothing that would keep a roof in place. "The truck's gone," Walter continued. "Sold that last fall. Tools went after. Everything that could go went." He glanced down at the cage. "These are what's left." The rain seemed to deepen for a moment, the sound of it thickening against the world. Eamon shifted his weight again, his boots sinking slightly into the mud. "You ever ask for help?" he said. Walter's expression changed. Not sharply, not dramatically, but something closed. "People around here got their own problems," he said. "Don't need mine on top of them." "That's not what I asked." Walter looked at him, a flicker of irritation breaking through the exhaustion. "I said what I meant," he replied. Lila spoke again, her voice quieter than before. "We tried once," she said. Walter didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on the cage. "They said they'd come by," she continued. They didn't. Eamon felt something shift inside him at that. Not anger. Not yet. Recognition. He had heard that sentence before, in different places, in different voices. They said they'd come. They didn't. A small pause settled between them. Then, without warning, Rhea moved. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't aggressive. She shifted her weight forward, just enough to bring her head closer to the bars. Her nose brushed the metal once, lightly, then stilled. Her eyes remained on Eamon, but something in them had changed. Not softer, clearer. Eamon felt it before he understood it. The way her gaze held him, not as a stranger, not as a threat, but as something being measured against a standard he could not see. He had worked with dogs like this before. Military K-9 units. Dogs that read intention before movement, that understood hesitation, that responded not just to commands but to the absence of them. They didn't guess. They decided. And for a brief, quiet second, Eamon had the distinct, unsettling impression that this dog was not waiting to be saved. She was waiting to see if he was the kind of man worth stepping toward. The feeling passed quickly. Or maybe he pushed it away. He straightened, breaking the line of sight. "How long has she been in that cage?" he asked. Walter glanced at the ground. "Since last night," he said. "Didn't want her wandering off. Didn't want—" He stopped again. Eamon finished the thought for him. "Didn't want someone taking her for free." Walter nodded once. "Something like that." Eamon looked at the lock on the cage. It was simple, cheap, easy to open if someone wanted to. But it was there. A boundary, thin but real. "Let her out," Eamon said. Walter blinked. "What?" "Let her out," Eamon repeated. "She's not going anywhere." Walter hesitated. Lila's hand tightened slightly on the bars. "She might," Walter said. "If she sees a chance, she won't," Eamon said. There was no force in his voice, no command, just certainty. Walter studied him for a moment, weighing something that had nothing to do with money. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. The metal scraped softly as he slid it into the lock. The click was quiet. Too quiet for something that felt that final. Walter opened the door just enough. Rhea did not rush out. She did not move at all. The puppies stirred slightly at the change, pressing closer to her. But she remained where she was, her body still angled protectively around them. Then, after a long moment, she stepped forward. One paw at a time. Careful, controlled. She moved out of the cage and onto the wet ground, her legs adjusting to the uneven surface. She shook once, water scattering from her coat, then stilled again. Her head lifted. She looked at Eamon. And then, without hesitation, she stepped between him and the rest of the market. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to choose. Eamon felt the weight of that without wanting to. Lila exhaled softly, a sound so small it almost disappeared under the rain. Walter closed the cage door behind the remaining puppies, though he did not lock it this time. Eamon stood there, the dog in front of him, the market moving around them as if nothing had changed. But something had. He could feel it. The line he had been standing on since he walked away the first time had shifted. Not crossed. Not yet. But no longer where it had been. He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against his wallet. Then he stopped. Not because he didn't know what to do, but because, for the first time in a long while, he understood that whatever he did next would not end here. The trailer sat at the far end of a narrow strip of land, where the road turned from cracked asphalt into packed dirt and old tire ruts. Rainwater had gathered in long, shallow trenches along the sides, reflecting the dull gray sky like something already drained of life. The place looked less like a home, and more like something waiting to be taken apart. Eamon Hale followed behind Walter and Lila without asking permission. None was offered. None was needed. Walter moved slowly, each step deliberate, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. Up close, the effort it took for him to keep walking was obvious. His breathing was uneven, shallow in a way that suggested more than fatigue. His left hand drifted often toward his chest, pressing lightly as if to steady something inside. Lila walked ahead of him, closer to the door, her movements quiet but precise. She reached the trailer first and pushed it open without hesitation. The hinges gave a low, tired groan. Inside, the air was warmer than outside, but heavy, thick with the smell of damp wood and something faintly medicinal. Eamon stepped in last. The space was small, narrower than it had looked from outside. A single overhead light flickered once before settling into a dim, steady glow. The walls were lined with faded paneling, warped slightly from years of moisture. A small table sat near the center, cluttered with paper, bills, notices, envelopes that had been opened and then folded back without resolution. On the far side, a narrow couch sagged under its own weight. A blanket had been spread across it, threadbare but clean, and beneath it, a thin mattress could be seen. That was where Rhea went. She entered without hesitation, guiding the puppies with small, careful movements of her body. The moment her paws touched the floor inside, something in her posture changed. Not relaxed, not fully, but less exposed. The puppies stumbled after her, their small bodies still unsteady. One paused halfway, looking back toward the door, as if unsure whether it should follow or stay. Rhea turned her head slightly, just enough, and the puppy moved again, pressing close to her side. Eamon watched that. The control, the quiet communication. He had seen it before, not often, not outside of very specific training environments. Walter closed the door behind them, leaning against it for a moment longer than necessary. His hand stayed on the handle as if he needed it to remain upright. "There's not much to see," he said, his voice softer inside the confined space. Eamon did not respond. He moved slowly, his gaze taking in details without lingering too long on any one thing. The table first, the papers, past due notices stacked in uneven piles. A red stamp on one of them caught his eye, bold even in the dim light. Final. Near the edge of the table sat a small plastic organizer filled with pills, different colors, different shapes, some compartments empty. He stepped closer. "What are you taking?" he asked without turning. Walter let out a quiet breath. "Heart," he said. "Doctor says it's nothing dramatic, just time catching up." Eamon picked up one of the bottles, reading the label briefly before setting it back exactly where it had been. "You're not taking them regularly," he said. It wasn't a question. Walter gave a faint, almost embarrassed shrug. "Stretching them," he replied, "trying to make them last." Eamon nodded once. That explained the tremor, the shallow breathing, the way Walter leaned on things just a fraction longer than he should have. Lila had already moved to the corner where Rhea lay. She sat on the floor without hesitation, her legs folding beneath her. One hand rested against the dog's side, not moving, not stroking, just there. Her fingers curled lightly into the damp fur, as if anchoring herself. Rhea lowered her head slightly, allowing the contact. The puppies shifted, pressing closer together, their small bodies gradually settling now that they were out of the rain. Eamon watched the girl for a moment. She did not look at him, not once. Her focus remained entirely on the dog and the small space they occupied, as if the rest of the room, and the man standing in it, were secondary. He had seen that kind of focus before. People who narrowed their world down to something small enough to hold, because everything else had already slipped beyond reach. "You been here long?" Eamon asked. Walter pushed himself away from the door and moved toward the small kitchenette. It consisted of a sink, a narrow counter, and a stove that looked older than the trailer itself. 10 years, Walter said. Maybe a little more. Came up here after everything else didn't work out. He didn't elaborate. Eamon didn't press. The details would come, or they wouldn't. Either way, the shape of the situation was already clear. "What time tomorrow?" Eamon asked. Walter paused, his back to him. "Early," he said. "8, maybe earlier, if they feel like it." "Sheriff's office?" Walter shook his head slightly. "Private company," he said. "They handle the lot. Sheriff just signs off." Eamon exhaled slowly. That tracked. Faster, cleaner, less room for negotiation. He turned his attention back to the room. There was no excess here. Nothing that hadn't already been sold, traded, or worn down to its last use. Even the small things, the chipped mug on the counter, the worn dish towel hanging near the sink, felt like they were being held onto by habit rather than necessity. His gaze returned to Rhea. She had settled fully now, her body curved around the puppies. Her breathing was steady, controlled, but her eyes remained open, watching. Not the room. Him. Eamon shifted slightly, testing the space, the angle. Her gaze followed. Not aggressively, precisely. He felt it again, that quiet, unsettling awareness. This dog was not reacting. She was evaluating. There was a moment, small, almost unnoticeable, when one of the puppies let out a soft, strained sound. The same one that had fallen earlier. Rhea responded instantly. She adjusted her position, nudging the small body closer, her nose brushing against it in a slow, deliberate motion. Then she stilled again, her body forming a tighter curve around all three. Lila's hand tightened slightly against her fur. "You shouldn't have brought them back in like this," Lila said suddenly. Her voice was still quiet, but there was something sharper in it now. Walter looked over. "What do you mean?" "They're going to get used to it," she said. "Being inside, being warm." Walter opened his mouth, then closed it again. He didn't answer. Eamon did. "They already are," he said. Lila finally looked at him. Her eyes were not accusing, they were tired. "That's the problem," she replied. The room fell silent again. Rain tapped against the thin roof in a steady, hollow rhythm. Eamon walked to the small window and looked out. From here, the market was just barely visible through the haze of rain and distance. The world beyond the trailer seemed muted, like something already fading. He rested one hand against the frame, the wood cool and slightly damp beneath his fingers. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, Rhea moved, not toward him, not toward the door. She stood, slowly, carefully, her body unfolding from around the puppies. They stirred at the loss of warmth, small movements of confusion, but she stepped away from them anyway. Lila's hand dropped to her lap. "Rhea?" she said softly. The dog did not look at her. She walked across the small space, her paws making almost no sound against the worn floor. Eamon turned slightly as she approached. She stopped a few feet away from him, close enough that he could see the detail in her eyes, the flecks of gold buried in the darker amber, the thin line of scar tissue near her shoulder. She held his gaze. Then, without warning, she lowered her head. Not all the way, not in submission, just enough to change the angle. Eamon felt something shift in his chest, sudden and unwelcome. He had seen dogs lower their heads before, in training, in surrender, in fear. This was none of those. This felt like a question, or maybe a decision. The moment stretched. Then she turned. Just as quietly as she had come, she walked back to the puppies and lay down again, her body settling around them with the same careful precision. Lila exhaled slowly, a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Walter watched the whole exchange without speaking. Eamon straightened, his hand still resting against the window frame. He looked at the room again, at the papers, at the pills, at the girl who had stopped expecting help, at the man who had stopped asking for it, at the dog who had not yet decided whether to trust him. He pushed himself away from the window. "I'll be back," he said. Walter didn't ask where he was going, didn't ask why. He just nodded once. Lila said nothing. Rhea did not look up. Eamon stepped outside into the rain again. The cold hit him immediately, sharper now, after the brief warmth of the trailer. Water soaked into his shoulders, into the fabric of his shirt, into the places where old seams had begun to loosen. He stood there for a moment. The door closed behind him, the sound of the rain filling the space again. He had walked away before. He had told himself it was the right call. He had lived with that. This time, as he turned toward his truck, the feeling was different. Not urgency, not yet, but something had settled into place. Something that would not let him pretend this was just another stop, just another situation, just another thing to pass by. He reached his truck, opened the door, and paused with one hand on the handle. Then he got in. Morning did not arrive clean. It came in layers of gray and rain that refused to lift, as if the sky itself had decided not to choose a side between night and day. The market was already alive again by the time Eamon Hale's truck rolled in, tires dragging through mud that had deepened overnight. The place looked worse in daylight. Not louder, not busier, just more honest. Water pooled beneath every table, every makeshift stand. The canvas roofs sagged under the weight of rain, dripping steadily. People moved slower today, shoulders hunched, conversations shorter, as if everyone was conserving something they didn't have enough of. Eamon parked farther back than before. He didn't rush. He stepped out, closed the door quietly, and let the rain settle across his shoulders without adjusting his posture. His boots sank slightly with each step as he moved through the rows of vendors. He already knew where he was going. He saw them before he reached the stall, 3 men. They stood in a loose triangle around the cage, not close enough to touch it, but near enough that the space belonged to them. They weren't looking at each other. They weren't speaking. They were looking at the dogs, not with curiosity, not with pity, with calculation. Eamon slowed his pace without meaning to. He had seen men like that before. Different places, different uniforms, same eyes. Derek Cole stood closest to the front of the cage. He was in his early 40s, tall but not imposing in the obvious way. His build was lean, almost understated, but there was a precision to the way he held himself that made space around him without effort. His dark hair was cut short, styled enough to suggest he cared, but not enough to look like he tried. A thin line of stubble traced his jaw, not rough, but deliberate. His coat was expensive. Charcoal wool, tailored, untouched by the kind of wear that came from necessity. It didn't belong here. Neither did he. The other 2 men were heavier, broader, built like labor, but dressed like they wanted to be something else. One had a thick beard, untrimmed, his face weathered and red from the cold. The other was younger, mid-30s maybe, with close-cropped blonde hair and a restless way of shifting his weight from one foot to the other. They weren't in charge. They didn't need to be. Derek didn't look up when Eamon approached. He already knew he was there. Walter stood behind the cage, one hand resting on the metal frame. His posture was tighter today, more rigid, as if something inside him had already started bracing for impact. Lila stood where she always did, between. Her shoulders were drawn inward slightly, her hands clenched at her sides. She didn't look at the men. She didn't look at Eamon. She looked at the dogs. Rhea had not been lying down. She stood the moment Eamon came into view, not because of him, because of them. Her body placed itself between the men and the puppies without any wasted motion. No sound, no warning, just position. The puppies pressed closer behind her, small shapes shifting against one another. Derek finally spoke. How much for the whole lot? His voice was calm, smooth, the kind of voice that didn't need to rise to be heard. Walter hesitated. Not, he began, then stopped. He swallowed, adjusting his grip on the cage. I told you yesterday, Walter said, quieter now. I'm not splitting them. Derek nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a point in a negotiation rather than a boundary. That's fine, he said. We'll take them all. He named a number. Low, not just low. Insulting. Eamon felt the shift before anyone reacted. Walter's jaw tightened. Lila's fingers curled tighter into her palms. Rhea did not move. But something in her stance changed. A subtle shift of weight forward, her paws pressing more firmly into the wet ground. The bearded man beside Derek let out a short breath through his nose, almost amused. That's generous, considering the condition, he added. Walter's eyes flicked to the puppies, then to Rhea, then back to Derek. It's not enough, Walter said. His voice didn't shake, but it wasn't steady either. Derek tilted his head slightly, studying him now. Enough for what? He asked. Walter didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone here understood. Time. That was what Walter was running out of. Derek stepped closer to the cage, his shoes sinking slightly into the mud. He didn't seem to notice. They're not worth more than that, he said. Not here. Not like this. Lila's breath hitched. Just once. Quiet. But Eamon heard it. Derek's gaze shifted briefly to her. Not unkind, not soft, just noting. She's attached, he said, almost conversationally. Walter's hand tightened on the cage. They're not merchandise, Walter replied. Derek gave the smallest hint of a smile. Everything is, he said. The younger man moved then. Not Derek, the blond one. He stepped forward, reaching toward the latch of the cage, fingers brushing against the cold metal. Let's just take a look, he muttered. Rhea reacted. Not with sound, not with movement, with stillness. Absolute stillness. Her body locked into place, her head lowering just slightly, her eyes fixed on the man's hand. Eamon felt it in his chest before it happened. That line, that invisible boundary. The man's fingers touched the latch and stopped. Not because Rhea lunged, not because she growled, because something in the air shifted. He hesitated, just long enough. Eamon stepped forward, not fast, not aggressive, just enough. His presence entered the space like a weight being placed on a scale. Don't, Eamon said. One word. Flat. The blond man looked up, irritation flashing across his face. Mind your business, he snapped. Eamon didn't raise his voice. This is it, he replied. The bearded man turned slightly, assessing now. Derek finally looked at Eamon fully. Really looked. For a moment, neither spoke. Rain tapped steadily against the metal roof above them. You know something about dogs? Derek asked. Eamon didn't answer immediately. He glanced at Rhea, at the way she stood, at the way she hadn't broken that line, even now. Yes, Eamon said. Derek nodded once, as if that confirmed something he had already suspected. She's trained, Derek said. It wasn't a question. Eamon didn't respond. Walter shifted slightly, uncomfortable. "They're not for—" Walter started. Derek lifted a hand, silencing him without looking. "She's not just trained," Derek continued, eyes still on Rhea. "She's waiting." That was when it happened. Rhea moved, not forward, not toward Derek. She turned her head, toward Eamon. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a fraction of a second, everything else seemed to fall away. The noise, the rain, the market, gone. There was only that look, focused, measured, expectant, as if something unspoken had already been placed between them. Eamon felt his breath slow, not consciously. Instinctively, he had stood in places where decisions were made without words, where timing mattered more than intent, where hesitation cost more than action. This felt like that. Not danger, not yet, but something close to it. Rhea held his gaze. Then she shifted. Half a step, just enough to open the space behind her, not exposing the puppies, not surrendering, making room. Eamon didn't move, not immediately, but something inside him settled. Not certainty, not clarity, direction. Derek watched the exchange without interruption. When it ended, he exhaled quietly. "Interesting," he said. He straightened slightly, adjusting his coat. "I'll give you one more chance," he said to Walter. "Same offer." Walter looked at Lila. Lila didn't look back. Her eyes were on Rhea, on Eamon, on something she didn't have words for. Walter swallowed. His shoulders dropped just slightly, the kind of movement a man makes when he runs out of places to stand. Eamon stepped forward again, this time closer. "Not enough," he said. Derek turned to him. "And what would be?" he asked. Eamon met his gaze. "A reason," he said. Derek's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A flicker. Recognition. Then it was gone. "You don't get those here," Derek replied. Eamon nodded slightly. "I do," he said. Silence settled over the group again. The rain continued. The market moved around them, unaware or unwilling to intervene. Derek studied him for another moment. Then he stepped back. Not retreating, repositioning. "This isn't over," he said. Not a threat, a statement. He turned, gesturing for the other two men to follow. They hesitated, then obeyed. Within seconds, they were gone, disappearing into the slow-moving crowd. The space they left behind felt different, lighter, but not safe. Not yet. Walter exhaled deeply, his hand trembling slightly against the cage. "They'll be back," he said. Eamon didn't argue. He looked at Rhea. She had already turned back to the puppies, as if the moment had passed, as if the decision hadn't been made yet. But something had shifted. He could feel it, and this time he didn't step away. Eamon Hale did not count the money twice. He already knew how much it was. Not enough to fix everything. Not enough to solve what had been breaking long before he stepped into that market. But enough, he hoped, to change the direction of one day. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a worn leather wallet, and took the cash from inside. The bills were folded flat, edges softened from use, not display. He placed them carefully on the metal edge of the cage, where the rain wouldn't soak through immediately. Walter stared at it. Not at the amount, at the gesture. "I'm not—" Walter began, but his voice faltered. Eamon shook his head once. "Not to buy them," he said. His voice was steady. low enough that it didn't carry beyond the small circle they stood in. "So, you don't have to sell." Walter's hand hovered over the money, but didn't touch it. His fingers trembled, not from cold this time, from weight. Lila looked up then, sharply, as if something had snapped inside her. Her eyes moved from the money to Eamon, searching his face for something. Doubt, maybe, or condition. She found neither. "You don't even know us," she said. Eamon met her gaze. "I know enough," he replied. That was all. No speech. No explanation. Walter exhaled slowly, like a man who had been holding his breath for longer than he realized. He reached out and picked up the money, not counting it, not inspecting it, just holding it for a moment before folding it into his coat. His shoulders lowered slightly, not relief, but less resistance. Rhea watched all of it. She had not moved from her position. Her body remained between the cage opening and the space where the men had stood earlier. The puppies shifted behind her, pressing closer, their small forms settling again now that the tension had eased. Eamon crouched slowly, not too close, not forcing the distance. Rhea's eyes tracked him, measuring the angle, the speed, the intention. He stopped a few feet away. Up close, the signs were clearer. The muscle tone beneath her coat, still strong despite the strain. The way her ears angled, not fearful, not aggressive, but alert in a controlled, disciplined way. The faint scar along her shoulder that spoke of past training, not neglect. "You weren't supposed to end up here," Eamon said quietly. It wasn't directed at Walter or Lila. Rhea didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. Walter cleared his throat. "They're not strays," he said. "Belonged to someone before. Guy passed, couple years back. Nobody came for them." Eamon nodded once. That fit. Dogs like this didn't just happen. "They'll be safe now?" Lila asked suddenly. Her voice was small, but it carried something raw beneath it. Eamon looked at her. "That depends," he said. "On what?" "On what happens next." Lila's brow tightened, confusion and fear threading together. Walter spoke before she could. "We'll manage," he said. "We always do." Eamon didn't argue. But he didn't agree either, because he had already seen the inside of that trailer, and managing wasn't what was happening there. Not anymore. The rain picked up again, heavier now, drumming against the canvas roofs above them. Around the market, people began packing early, folding tables, covering goods, preparing to leave before the ground turned completely unusable. Time was moving. Eamon stood. "You should get back," he said. Walter nodded. "Yes," he replied. Before, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They all understood what came with morning. The three of them moved together, Walter carrying the cage this time, Lila walking close at his side. Rhea followed without being pulled, her body angled protectively around the puppies as they shifted with each step. Eamon walked behind them, not leading, not guiding, just there. The trailer looked the same as it had the day before, but it didn't feel the same. Inside, the air was still heavy, still damp, still carrying the faint medicinal scent of Walter's pills and the deeper, older smell of wood that had absorbed too many seasons. Walter set the cage down carefully. Lila opened it immediately. Rhea stepped out first, slow, controlled, scanning the space before allowing the puppies to follow. They stumbled out behind her, legs unsteady, but eager for the small familiar patch of blanket that marked their place. Eamon watched as Rhea circled once, then lay down again, her body forming that same protective curve. Nothing about her behavior was accidental. Every movement had purpose. Walter moved to the small table, placing the money beside the stack of bills. He stared at it for a long moment, then reached for one of the envelopes, pulling it closer. "This will cover part of it," he muttered. "Maybe enough to stall them." "Not stop them," Eamon said. Walter didn't look up. "No," he admitted. "Not stop." Lila sat on the floor again, her hand returning to Rhea's side. This time her fingers moved slightly, a slow, absent motion through the damp fur. "Then what happens?" she asked. Walter didn't answer. Because there wasn't one. The day faded into evening without ceremony. Rain turned to a thin, steady drizzle, the kind that didn't demand attention, but never stopped. The light outside dimmed early, swallowed by low clouds and thick air. Eamon didn't leave. He sat in the narrow space near the door, one shoulder resting lightly against the wall, not comfortable, not relaxed. Present. Walter dozed in the chair at one point, his head tilting forward, breath uneven but steady enough. The pill organizer sat untouched on the table. Lila didn't move much. She stayed near Rhea, her body folding into itself as the hours passed, exhaustion settling in quietly. The puppies slept. For a while, nothing happened. And then, Rhea stood, not abruptly, not with alarm, with certainty. Her head lifted first, ears angling toward the far side of the trailer, the direction of the road. Her body followed, unfolding slowly, her posture tightening in a way Eamon had seen before. He didn't hear anything, not yet. But he watched her. The way her focus narrowed, the way her breathing shifted, deeper, controlled. Then, he heard it, faint. A sound outside. Not loud, just enough. Gravel under weight. A step, then another. Eamon's hand moved instinctively, not reaching for a weapon. He didn't have one, but settling into a position of readiness, his body aligning without conscious thought. Walter stirred in his chair. "What is it?" he murmured. Eamon didn't answer. Rhea had moved to the door now, not scratching, not barking, standing, still. Her eyes fixed on a point beyond the thin wall. Lila looked up, her expression tightening instantly. "Rhea?" she whispered. The dog didn't respond. The sound outside came again, closer, then light. A thin beam slid across the edge of the window, brief but unmistakable. Headlights, cutting through the drizzle, then gone. Silence returned. But it was not the same silence. It was heavier, watching. Eamon stood slowly. Walter pushed himself upright, one hand gripping the edge of the table. "They said morning," he muttered. Eamon shook his head. "Not them," he said. He moved toward the door, stopping just short of it. Rhea shifted slightly, making space without breaking her stance. Again, that small, deliberate adjustment. Eamon placed a hand lightly on the door frame. He didn't open it. Not yet. He listened. Nothing. No voices. No engine. Just the soft, steady sound of rain. But the air had changed. He felt it. The same way he had felt it in places where danger didn't announce itself. Where it waited. Lila's voice came from behind him. "They came back," she said. Not a question. A statement. Eamon didn't turn. "Maybe," he replied. His eyes stayed on the door, on the thin line where wood met frame, on the space where something could push through. Rhea lowered her head slightly, not in fear, in readiness. Eamon exhaled slowly, and in that moment, he understood something he hadn't wanted to admit before. This wasn't about money anymore, or dogs, or one bad day in a muddy market. This was a line, and he had stepped over it. He stepped back from the door. "Stay inside," he said. Walter frowned. "What are you—" Eamon didn't wait for the question to finish. He opened the door and stepped out into the rain. The cold hit him instantly, sharper now in the dark. The yard was empty. Shadows stretched long and indistinct under the weak light from the trailer window. No car, no movement. Just the faint tracks in the mud where something had been and left. Eamon stood there for a moment, letting the rain soak into his shirt, into the seams of his boots, into the places where hesitation used to live. Behind him, inside the trailer, Rhea shifted. He didn't need to look to know. She was still watching the door, still waiting, not for danger, for him. Eamon closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. This time there was no question left. He turned back toward the trailer. Not to leave, to stay. Morning came without sunlight. The rain had thinned into a cold mist that clung to everything, turning the world pale and unfinished. The trailer stood where it had always stood, but something about it felt different now. Not stronger, not safer, just occupied. Eamon Hale had not slept much. He sat on the narrow step outside the trailer, elbows resting loosely on his knees, his hands clasped together in a way that looked relaxed but wasn't. His eyes moved slowly across the ground in front of him, following the faint tire tracks left behind in the mud. They had come close enough to look, close enough to decide, and then they had left. That was what bothered him. Men like that didn't leave without taking something. Behind him, the trailer door creaked open. Lila stepped out quietly, pulling the thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. She looked smaller in the gray light, her frame narrow, her movements careful, as if she had learned long ago not to take up more space than she needed. "You stayed," she said. It wasn't surprise. It was confirmation. Eamon didn't turn right away. "For now," he replied. Lila came to stand beside him, not too close, her eyes following the same tracks in the mud. "They came back," she said. Eamon nodded. "Yeah." She was silent for a moment, then asked, "Will they come again?" Eamon finally looked at her. "Yes." There was no reason to soften it. Lila nodded once, as if she had expected that answer all along. Inside the trailer, Walter coughed, a dry, uneven sound that lingered longer than it should have. It was followed by the faint scrape of a chair moving. Eamon stood. "How long has he been like that?" he asked. Lila hesitated. "A while," she said. "Worse when it's cold." Eamon stepped inside. Walter sat at the table, one hand pressed lightly against his chest, the other gripping the edge of the wood as if it might shift beneath him. His face had lost some color overnight, the lines around his mouth deeper, his breathing shorter. "You took your pills?" Eamon asked. Walter gave a small, humorless smile. "Stretching them," he said again. Eamon reached for the organizer, opening it without asking. The compartments told the truth clearly enough. Not enough. Not even close. He closed it and set it down. "You're not going to make it like this," he said. Walter didn't argue. "I wasn't planning to," he replied quietly. The honesty in that answer settled heavily in the room. Lila looked down. Rhea watched. She had taken position near the door again, her body angled outward, her attention split between the inside and whatever lay beyond the thin walls. Eamon moved to the small window, pushing the curtain aside just enough to look out. The road was empty, for now. He let the curtain fall back into place. "We need to move fast," he said. Walter frowned slightly. "With what?" he asked. "We've got nothing left to move with." Eamon turned back to him. "That's not true," he said. Walter gave him a tired look. "It is." Eamon shook his head. "You've got time," he said. "Not much, but enough to change something." Walter didn't respond, because they both knew time was the one thing slipping through his hands. Eamon reached for his jacket. "I'll be back," he said. Lila looked up. "Where are you going?" "To ask." Walter let out a quiet breath. "That usually doesn't work." Eamon met his eyes. "It doesn't," he agreed. "But I'm not asking for permission." He stepped outside before either of them could respond. The town wasn't far. A few miles of wet road, lined with trees that had begun to lose their color under the weight of early cold. Eamon's truck cut through the mist, tires humming against the slick surface. He didn't drive aimlessly. He knew where he was going. The hardware store sat at the edge of town, its faded sign barely visible through the fog. The parking lot was half empty, the kind of place that survived not because it thrived, but because it had nowhere else to go. Inside, the air smelled of wood, metal, and dust. A bell chimed softly as Eamon entered. The man behind the counter looked up. Graham Pike. Mid-50s, broad through the shoulders, his build softened slightly by time but not by neglect. His hair had gone gray early, cropped short and uneven, as if he cut it himself out of habit rather than care. A thick mustache framed his upper lip, and his eyes, sharp, dark, held the steady awareness of someone who had seen enough to recognize trouble when it walked in. "You're not from around here," Graham said. It wasn't a question. Eamon shook his head. "No." Graham leaned one arm on the counter. "What do you need?" Eamon didn't list tools. "Help," he said. Graham's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. "Depends what kind," he replied. Eamon stepped closer. "There's a trailer off the South Road," he said. "Old man, heart condition, kid. They're getting pulled tomorrow." Graham listened without interrupting. "There were men there last night," Eamon continued, "looking for more than just a deal." Graham exhaled slowly. "Derek," he said. Eamon nodded once. "You know him." Graham gave a short, dry laugh. "Everyone does," he said. "Most just pretend they don't." He straightened slightly. "What are you asking?" Eamon met his gaze. "Time," he said, "and enough people to make it cost him something to come back." Graham studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Give me an hour," he said. Eamon didn't thank him. He didn't need to. Some agreements didn't require it. On the way back, the road felt shorter. Not because it was, because something had shifted. Not certainty, but movement. When Eamon pulled up to the trailer again, the mist had begun to lift slightly, revealing more of the surrounding land. It still looked fragile, still temporary, but less invisible than before. He stepped out and stopped. Rhea was already outside. She stood a few feet from the door, her body still, her ears angled toward the road. She hadn't barked, hadn't moved to greet him. She had been waiting. Eamon approached slowly. "You heard me coming," he said quietly. Rhea didn't move, but her eyes shifted, to him, then back to the road. as if reminding him, this wasn't about him. Not entirely. He stepped past her and entered the trailer. Walter looked up. "You came back," he said. Eamon nodded. "And I'm not alone," he replied. Lila frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Eamon didn't answer right away. Because in that moment, Rhea moved, not toward the door, not toward the puppies, toward him. She stepped closer than she ever had before, her head level, her eyes fixed on his face. The space between them closed to nothing. Eamon held still. Her nose hovered near his hand. Not touching. Not yet. Then she pressed forward, light, brief, but deliberate, her nose against his fingers. And then she stepped back, returning to her place near the door. Eamon exhaled slowly. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Behind him, Lila whispered, "She's never done that." Walter said nothing, because he understood. Some choices weren't made with words. They were made in moments like that. Eamon turned back to them. "We're going to fix what we can today," he said. Walter looked at him, something like disbelief flickering across his face. "You think that's enough?" he asked. Eamon shook his head. "No," he said, "but it's more than nothing." Lila stepped closer. "Are you going to leave?" she asked. Eamon looked at her, really looked, at the way she held herself, at the way she had already prepared for the answer, at the way hope had become something she handled carefully, like it might break if she held it too tightly. He opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in a long time, he didn't have a ready answer, not one he trusted. He looked past her, at Walter, at the trailer, at Rhea, at the small space that had somehow become something he couldn't step away from without consequence. "I don't know," he said, and the truth of it settled into the room, not as weakness, as something else, something unfinished. The rain did not end all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, like something reluctant to leave. By the third morning, the clouds had begun to thin, breaking in quiet seams that allowed pale light to slip through. The ground was still wet, the air still sharp, but something in the atmosphere had shifted. The trailer remained where it stood. That alone was a kind of miracle no one spoke about directly. Eamon Hale noticed it first in the small things. The absence of engine noise at dawn, the lack of footsteps in the mud, the way the road stayed empty longer than expected. He stood outside with a mug of coffee Graham had brought the night before, its warmth long gone, but he held it anyway. The yard stretched in front of him, uneven and worn, but no longer waiting for something to arrive and take it apart. Behind him, the trailer door opened. Walter stepped out carefully, one hand bracing against the frame. He looked older in daylight, the gray in his hair sharper, his posture still fragile, but there was a steadiness in him that hadn't been there before. His breathing, while still shallow, no longer carried that constant edge of strain. "You're still here," Walter said. Eamon didn't turn. "Yeah." Walter nodded once, as if confirming something he already knew. "They didn't come back," he added. Eamon glanced toward the road. "Not yet," he said. Walter gave a faint smile. "That's enough for today." It was. Inside, the trailer had changed in subtle ways. Not cleaner, not repaired, but lived in differently. A small paper bag of medication now sat on the table, its label marked clearly from the clinic in town. The compartments in Walter's organizer were no longer empty. Not full, either. Just balanced, enough to matter. Lila had left early. Eamon had watched her from the window as she stepped onto the road, a worn backpack slung over her shoulder. She hadn't said much, just a brief nod in his direction, before walking off. But her posture had changed, slightly, less guarded, less like she was preparing for something to be taken from her at any moment. "She went back," Walter said quietly, following Eamon's gaze. "School?" Walter nodded. First time in a while. Eamon didn't comment. He didn't need to. Some returns were louder than others. Behind them, movement shifted softly. Rhea stepped out. Her coat had begun to regain its fullness, the black and tan fur catching what little light filtered through the clouds. She moved without hesitation now, her steps measured, but no longer constrained by the same tight caution she had carried before. The puppies followed, still clumsy, still small, but louder now. One stumbled over its own paws and rolled sideways into the damp grass, letting out a soft, surprised sound before scrambling upright again. Another chased after it, uncoordinated but determined. Walter watched them, something like disbelief flickering across his face. "They weren't like that a few days ago," he said. Eamon crouched slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. "They were cold," he replied. Walter nodded. "Yeah," he said. "So were we." That sat between them for a moment. Simple, true. A truck approached slowly along the road, its tires crunching lightly over gravel. Eamon straightened. Rhea noticed before he did. Her head lifted, ears angling forward, her body stilling in that familiar, controlled way. But she didn't move toward the door. She didn't retreat either. She watched. The truck came to a stop a few yards from the trailer. Graham Pike stepped out first. He wore the same worn jacket from the day before, its sleeves rolled slightly at the cuffs, exposing rough hands that spoke of long years working wood and metal. His expression remained as steady as ever, but his eyes moved quickly, taking in the space, the people, the dogs. Behind him came another man, shorter, broader, mid-40s, with a shaved head and a thick beard that had begun to gray at the edges. His name, Eamon would learn quickly, was Tom Alvarez. Tom moved with the confidence of someone used to physical work, his boots landing heavily but with purpose. His face was open in a way that suggested blunt honesty, the kind that didn't hide behind politeness. "You the one causing trouble out here?" Tom asked, glancing at Eamon. There was no accusation in it, just curiosity. Eamon met his gaze. "Depends who you ask," he said. Tom grinned slightly. "Fair enough." Graham stepped forward, nodding once toward Walter. "Got the paperwork pushed back," he said. "Couple days. Maybe more if the office stays backed up." Walter blinked. "You did that." Graham shrugged. "Didn't hurt to ask," he said. "Also, didn't hurt to mention there'd be people watching if they came early." Walter looked between them, his grip tightening slightly on the doorframe. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. Tom waved a hand. "Say nothing," he said. "Just don't let the place fall apart while we're standing here." He moved past them without waiting for an answer, already scanning the trailer's exterior. "This roof's going to leak again," he muttered. "And that step's one good storm away from breaking." Eamon watched him. "You planning to fix it?" he asked. Tom glanced back over his shoulder. "Wasn't planning not to," he replied. Graham smirked slightly. That's his way of saying yes. The work began without ceremony. Boards were measured, cut, and nailed into place. The loose step was reinforced, the sagging edge of the roof patched with whatever materials could be found and repurposed. It wasn't perfect, but it held. Lila returned in the afternoon. She stopped at the edge of the yard, her gaze moving over the scene. Tom on the roof, Graham hauling lumber, Eamon near the door, Walter standing with a look that hovered somewhere between confusion and relief. For a moment she didn't move. Then she stepped forward, slowly, like she wasn't sure if this was something she was allowed to walk into. Rhea noticed her first. She moved across the yard, her pace steady, her posture open. No hesitation. Lila dropped her bag without thinking, crouching down as the dog approached. This time, when Rhea reached her, she didn't just stand beside her. She pressed in, close, solid. Lila's hands found her fur, fingers tightening slightly as she leaned forward, and then she laughed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't long, but it was real. Eamon felt it before he processed it. That sound, unforced, unplanned. He turned slightly, watching the moment without interrupting it, and something in his chest shifted, not sharply, not painfully, just enough to remind him that not everything he had left behind had to stay broken. Later, as the light began to fade again, the work slowed. Tom climbed down from the roof, wiping his hands on his jeans. "It'll hold," he said. "Not forever, but long enough." Graham nodded. "That's usually all we get," he replied. Walter stepped forward. "You didn't have to do this," he said. Tom shrugged. "Didn't want to do something else," he replied. Graham glanced at Eamon. "You planning on staying?" he asked. Eamon didn't answer immediately. He looked at the trailer, at Walter, at Lila, at the yard, at Rhea. She stood a few feet away now, watching him, not waiting, not expecting, just there. He stepped toward her, slowly. She didn't move, didn't shift her weight, didn't lower her head. She met him where he stood. Eamon extended his hand, not commanding, not offering anything she hadn't already accepted, just present. Rhea stepped forward, closed the space, and placed her head against his palm, not lightly, not briefly, with weight, with certainty. Eamon exhaled. This time he didn't hold it back. Behind him, Lila watched. Walter said nothing. Graham and Tom turned away, giving the moment the kind of quiet respect it didn't ask for. Eamon stood there, his hand resting against the dog's head, feeling the steady warmth beneath her fur. He didn't think about what he had done, or what it had cost, or what might still come. He only understood one thing. He hadn't fixed everything. He hadn't saved them with money, or strength, or even certainty. He had stayed, and sometimes that was the difference. There are moments in life when everything we thought we were building begins to fall apart quietly. Not with noise, not with warning, just small cracks that grow until one day we realize we have been holding up something that was already broken. This story is not about a man who saved a family with money. It is about a man who chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. It is about a girl who learned that hope does not always disappear. It just waits for someone to prove it can return. And it is about a dog who, even after being pushed to the edge, still found the strength to trust again. Sometimes, what looks like loss is not the end. Sometimes, it is God clearing away what was never meant to last, so something more honest can begin. We often think miracles come as sudden, overwhelming changes, but more often, they come quietly, in the form of someone showing up, in the form of a hand that doesn't pull away, in the form of a choice to stay when everything inside us says to walk away. God does not always fix our lives by restoring what we had. Sometimes He leads us into something new, something that requires courage, patience, and faith, something that asks us to become the kind of person who does not turn away when things get hard. In our daily lives, we are all given small moments like this. A person who needs help, an animal that depends on us, a situation where we can choose convenience or compassion. And too often, we tell ourselves we will act later, when life is easier, when we have more time. But love does not wait for the perfect moment. It is proven in the moments we choose to show up, even when we are unsure, even when we feel unprepared. If this story touched your heart, take a moment today to look around you. Someone near you may be silently struggling. Someone may be waiting, just like Rhea was, for a reason to trust again. Be that reason. If this message meant something to you, share this story with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what part of this story stayed with you the most. And if you believe in stories that remind us of compassion, faith, and second chances, subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing these stories to you. May God bless you, protect your home, strengthen your heart, and guide your steps wherever you are.